So as you've seen, we've got a way to take exhaust from the head into the turbo. This is good. Problem is that exhaust then dumps out the turbo into my boot, and that's, well, the opposite of good. So what we need is a way to take the exhaust gases from the turbo and out the back of the car. Now I do have an exhaust silencer on there, but it's a bit small. It's only 2.25 inches, and that's quite restrictive and would limit our power. And limiting horsepower goes against my religion. So what we want is a very nice 3-inch system. And there's a lot of companies out there that make very nice 3-inch systems. The problem is, very nice 3-inch systems cost many monies. And many monies is too many monies for me. So instead, I've got a job lot of parts here, which I'm going to turn into an exhaust. You see, I live with someone who was a welder for 25 years. And as any child should, I'm going to take blatant advantage of it. So what we've got here is the silencer box. Now this is the main bit of the exhaust. This is what makes things go from loud to quiet. This is actually not as big as my old one, because you see that one's an oval, which means it's got a bit more volume. This one, however, is longer, so the actual volume isn't too much less, and hopefully it's not going to make my ears bleed. Then we've got a couple of bends about the place, because as it turns out, exhausts don't go straight. Who knew? This smaller pipe we'll come back to. You see, that's going to be for the dump pipe, which we'll go into a bit more detail on later. You can also see I've got a couple of flexi sections, because if your exhaust doesn't flex when the engine moves, you just crack welds. And then you end up with a blowing exhaust and have to weld it all over again. And that sounds like more effort, which is too much effort for me. So, with all of our components here, let's get over to the car and see about turning this into something, well, exhausty. So let's get our exhaust flange in place and then gently punch a hole for the downpipe to pass through. Now that we know the sort of space we're going to be working with, we can mock up where the bends are going to come from the turbo. However, to know where they're going to go, we need to get the silencer in place. I've supported this up with some bungee cords and then just spaced it out with some wooden blocks so I know exactly where it's going to sit. Then the first two bends of the exit piping can be tacked on the other side, just so I know where it's all going to go, and we can look at making this stay permanently. So I need to bend up an exhaust hanger or two. Let's try that one again with a bit more leverage. There we go. Now we weld these in place to keep everything in check, and this sets the final position of our silencer. So we can start tacking up the bends and the flexi where they're going to come up towards the turbo. There's something we need to address, namely the wastegate. Now a wastegate is quite a simple thing. It just lets exhaust gas through it, and the exhaust gas goes away as waste. Simple. Or at least it would be. Well, actually it can be. You can just run a pipe out the side. It's called a screamer pipe. It screams, it's loud, and they're pretty cool. Problem is, you can't really get onto any racetrack in the country while you're running one. So I'm going to have to do a recirculating wastegate, which means that I recirculate the exhaust gas back into the system a little further down. And there's two golden rules when you do that. One, you want your exhaust gas to come back in about 18 inches somewhere downstream from the turbo. Two, never ever do it on a bend. You see, you also want it to come in at quite a sharp angle as well. That way there's the least amount of disruption to flow as it rejoins the exhaust. If you put it on a bend, then it comes in, hits the bend, and bounces back. All of that just messes with the flow. So the 18-inch thing, I mean, that's quite easy. So long as I don't just run a pipe straight along into that bend, then if we come down a bit, we can get 18 inches without much of a struggle. Problem is, there's a flexi section there, so I can't bring it in there. And if we look down there, there's a bend. Huh. I seem to have shot myself in the foot with this one, but I think I've found a way around it. You see, the reason you don't want it coming in on a bend, as I've said before, is because it messes with the flow. But if I take a bend like this, and fit it in like that, so that it goes along the direction of the exhaust system, technically I'm not pushing it in on the bend at all. I'm just firing the waste exhaust gas in the same direction as the current flow. At least that's the plan. I could be totally wrong. There's actually a good chance I'm totally wrong. It happens sometimes. Anyways, back to our regularly scheduled programming of me probably cutting more pipe. So let's get that bend shaped to fit our downpipe and see how it all fits. And we've lost too much length from the notch, so it's sitting too close for the flexi. Brilliant. Well, now we need to cut off and shape that exact same notch into a straight extension pipe to make it sit a bit further back. Now we can drill out our downpipe and start tacking it all together, from the bend to the flexi. Problem solved. Now we need to work out where the actual piping is going to go for the turbo and the wastegate. I'm going to tack up the wastegate first just because it's easier. For the downpipe itself though, to fill that gap we're going to need to make some pie cuts.
These are just straight bits with 2 angles cut on either side that you can use to make bends. And cut some more, and a bit more cutting. Finally, we can move on to tacking these all up, 1 pie cut at a time. With the front done, it's time to turn our attention to the back. I'm going to stick my clamshell back on here and we can start tacking up where the tailpipe's going to go. And just like that, we've got a fully tacked exhaust. Next up, we've got a spot of welding to do. And by a spot, I mean we've got a lot of welding to do. Remember, whenever you're welding thin stuff like this, you want to do a lot of small welds so as not to melt your way through the piping you're using. As we're using a MIG welder, I'm also going to give the welds a quick tidy up and just go over the more visible areas with a finishing pad and a bit of polish to make it pretty. Now, as we had to use normal filler rod because of the gas we've got, I'm going to coat it all in high temperature lacquer just to try and protect the welds from oxidising. So I mask it all up, neaten the tape and spray a few coats at a time. Then we can go find something else to do for a bit while that all dries, and come back for the next few coats until it's all nicely covered. And for our finishing touch, we're just going to do the manifold with some thermal wrapping, also known as the itchiest stuff in existence.
So after that exhausting bit of work, we've got ourselves a finished exhaust. Now there's a few things to notice about my exhaust system. The main and most obvious one being that it's been MIG welded instead of TIG welded. You see, TIG welding is usually what you do for an exhaust, or any real thin welding. And it's much prettier, it's more precise, and it looks better. Had I TIG welded it, I wouldn't have had to do any of the refinishing that I did on the welds. However, problem is, I don't have a TIG welder. What I do have is a MIG welder and a dad that used to weld for a living. On that note though, and because I'm sure he'd like me to mention it, he's a little conscious about the shape of his welds, mainly because they don't look like they were done by a machine like they used to, and that's just because his eyesight's not what it was. In my case though, I'm really happy with it, it's better than anything I can do, and I think it looks cool. You see, the big downpipe on the turbo, I was going to wrap that as well with the heat wrap stuff, you know, for the race car look, and also to hide the welds I'd had to dress. However, I've actually polished it up instead, and even though there's still a few of the marks from where I took it out with the grindette, I think it looks pretty cool. It'll be a nice neat little piece for when you look in the boot. It's a tiny bit rough, but it does brilliantly, just like the rest of the car. We've also coated it in that high temperature lacquer, and there is a good reason for that. You see, this is all stainless steel, which is great. Now, to weld stainless steel, you would normally use stainless steel welding wire, but stainless steel welding wire requires pure argon gas. And in this lockdown, good luck getting pure argon gas. What we do have is half a tank of Ferromax, which is basically just argon mixed with CO2. And it works fine with normal welding filler wire, so it wouldn't really work with the stainless steel wire. In fact, we did try it, we tried really hard, and it just wasn't for it. So I've had to use normal welding filler wire. And I mean, it could rust. My other exhaust was done with it too, and it didn't rust too bad. Because you see, welding wire does take a little bit of the metals on either side of it as it all mixes together. However, I've lacquered it all up in the hope that it protects it for as long as possible. Now, as I may have mentioned before, all of this will be coming out again for some other modifications in a year or two, so if need be, I can do it again then. Hopefully I'll have a TIG welder. I've also wrapped this up, as you can see. Now, ideally with this, you'd have wetted down the stuff, and it means it's a lot easier to work with. It's a lot bendier, it's a lot less stiff. So this has worked out a little baggy. Also, log manifolds are an absolute pain to wrap up with heat wrap. I've done a few tubular manifolds and they've turned out quite nice, but that was just hell. I've also used these metal cable ties, mainly because it's what comes with them. It's what most of you guys will see if you do it at home. Normally I would just do it with stainless steel wire because it's a lot neater and a lot smaller, and I feel like I can get it a bit tighter. There's a good chance I'm going to redo that because I absolutely hate the steel cable ties. However, other than that, I have just written a massive list of things I want to change. But the point is, my exhaust is done, it's ready to go on the car. However, the car's not really ready for an exhaust to go on it, because round about now, there's an engine sitting over there, a gearbox over there, and the engine in my car is about to come out. So at some point, this will be ready to go on the car. Hopefully soon. Anyways, I feel like I've talked a bit too much this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, even if it was probably a shorter one. But here you go. Here's my exhaust. See you next time.